$800. That was all he paid for it. The Honda Civic sat in the school parking lot like an apology, rust crawling up the wheel wells, a side mirror held on by electrical tape, the exhaust pipe rattling every time the engine idled. Other parents pulled in with SUVs and crossovers, infotainment screens glowing, leather seats warmed. They glanced at the Civic the way people glance at something they'd rather not see. A few looked away quickly. One woman in a white Lexus actually pulled her car a few spaces farther down the row, easing forward slowly, deliberately, as though proximity itself was the problem. The man behind the wheel didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't show it. He was 43 years old. Worn flannel shirt, washed so many times the plaid had softened into something almost gentle. Jeans with a paint streak across the left knee that no washing had ever fully removed. Hands resting easy on the steering wheel, and those hands told their own story. Thick knuckles. A scar along the right thumb from something that had needed stitches once. Calloused palms. Hands that had worked for 20 years and intended to keep working. His name was Daniel. He sat in that car every single Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 3:15 p.m. Never late. Always 5 minutes before the bell. Same spot. Third row from the entrance, slightly left of center so he could see the main doors without craning. The other parents had begun to notice the pattern even if they hadn't noticed him. The rusted car in the same spot. The man who never got out to stand with the other adults near the entrance. Who never joined the pickup line social hour with its coffee thermoses and weekend plans and the particular laughter of people who have enough. Daniel waited alone. He was good at that. He had a paper bag on the passenger seat. Inside, one peanut butter sandwich on whole wheat, cut diagonally, and a small bag of apple slices in a twist-tied Ziploc. He made it every morning. He made it the same way every morning. Same bread, same diagonal cut, same 6 apple slices. Because certainty is its own kind of love. What none of them knew, what the parents in the SUVs and the school board members who occasionally observed afternoon pickup could not have guessed, was what that silence in the front seat of the $800 Honda actually contained. What the man carried quietly behind those calm eyes. What the 2-letter abbreviation in his phone contacts meant. What the folder in his filing cabinet at home represented, and why it was sealed with a government classification sticker that had never been removed. Then the bell rang. A small girl in a navy blue jacket came sprinting across the parking lot, backpack bouncing, one shoe half unlaced, both arms already reaching, and Daniel got out of the car in one motion. And standing above that rust-eaten chassis in the pale October light, for just a moment, he looked like a completely different kind of man. Shoulders back. Chin level. Still as a tree in wind. That was the first thing the school board member noticed. Patricia Holt, walking to her car across the lot, agenda folder tucked under one arm. She paused for half a second. Something about him was wrong. Not threatening. Just inconsistent. Like a word used correctly in a sentence where you expected it to be misused. She filed it away and kept walking. She didn't know yet that she would be thinking about that half second for a long time to come. Daniel Reeves had not planned to be a single father. Nobody plans it. You just become it, quietly, in the space left behind by someone who was supposed to stay. His wife, Carla, had left when their daughter Maisie was 3 years old. Not dramatically. No screaming, no broken dishes, no single catastrophic night. She had packed 2 bags on a Tuesday while Daniel was on a job site, left a note on the kitchen counter that he read standing up because sitting down felt like it would make it more real, and by the time Maisie woke from her afternoon nap the house had a new shape, one missing person wide, every room slightly altered by the absence. He had stood in the kitchen for 11 minutes holding that note. Then he'd folded it, put it in his back pocket, and gone to check on Maisie. That was 4 years ago. He hadn't spoken about it much since. He went back to work the next morning. He had a daughter to feed. His life now had a specific texture, the texture of a man who had engineered his days around someone else's needs with the precision of a project plan. Up at 5:20 a.m. coffee in the same chipped blue mug, because routine is a form of stability. Lunches packed the night before, because mornings couldn't afford surprises. He worked residential construction, trim carpentry mostly, the detail work, the finish work, the kind that required patience and a steady hand and the willingness to care about things other people would never see up close. He was good at it. He charged fair rates and never cut corners, which meant he stayed employed and never got rich, which meant the Honda stayed in service and the apartment on Birchwood remained within reach. 3 rooms. A small kitchen that got good afternoon light and smelled like coffee until noon. Maisie's bedroom had drawings taped to the wall in so many overlapping layers they had become their own wallpaper. Horses, mostly. Always horses. She was 8 years old and she was absolutely, categorically convinced that her life's work involved horses, and she pursued this conviction with a scientific seriousness that Daniel found quietly astonishing. He never told her that. He just listened. On the evenings he picked her up from school, she would climb into the passenger seat of the Civic, or lately the back seat, which she had decided felt more like a taxi, and she liked watching the city scroll past the window, and she would deliver a full daily report with the gravity of a field correspondent. Who had said what? Which teacher had mispronounced which word? Whether the cafeteria macaroni had been acceptable? Whether the acceptable threshold had been met or merely approached? Daniel would listen without interrupting, eyes on the road, one hand on the wheel, nodding at the precise moments that required it. One Thursday afternoon she climbed in, buckled her seatbelt, and set her backpack carefully on her knees. Then she reached into the front pocket and pulled out a crumpled paper, a reading comprehension worksheet, and smoothed it slowly and deliberately flat against her thigh. She'd gotten a gold star sticker in the top right corner. She examined it for a moment. Then she leaned forward and placed it on the dashboard, centering it carefully between the defroster vents. She sat back, returned to her backpack zipper. Daniel looked at the gold star, then at the road, then back at the star. "That where you're putting it," he said. "It needs to be somewhere important," she said, without looking up. He didn't say anything else. But the corner of his mouth moved, just barely, in the way it moved when something hit closer than he expected. There was a period of Daniel's life, before Maisie, before trim carpentry, before the Honda and Birchwood Avenue and gold stars on dashboards, when he had operated in a world that looked nothing like any of this. He still received certain emails, occasionally, that he read and did not reply to immediately. He kept them in a folder labeled with a date, no subject line. He had a phone number in his contacts saved under 2 letters, RF, that he had never explained to anyone who'd glimpsed it. He had a filing cabinet in the hall closet. One drawer was locked. Had been locked for 4 years. He had been something else once. Something structured and credentialed and consequential in ways that had required a security clearance and a government ID and the ability to sit in rooms where decisions were made that affected thousands of people he would never meet. He hadn't decided whether that chapter was closed or merely paused. Some evenings, sitting at the kitchen table after Maisie was asleep, he thought about it. He would look at the locked drawer of the filing cabinet, visible through the open closet door, and he would sit with the question for a while. Then he would get up and pack the next day's lunch. The trouble started with a man named Gerald. Gerald Marsh was 61 years old, retired from 30 years of postal work, and lived 3 units down the hall from Daniel and Maisie in the Birchwood complex. He had bad hips, a fixed social security income, and a heating system in his apartment that had been failing in increments since early September. He'd submitted a maintenance request in writing to the building manager on September 8th. He'd followed up by phone on September 19th and received a voicemail response that promised action within the week. By October 7th, nothing had been done, and the voicemail had not been returned a second time. Gerald was sleeping in his coat and his hat. Daniel found out the way you find things out in a 3-story walk-up with thin walls and shared radiator lines. He heard it through the silence. Not Gerald complaining. Gerald never complained, had apparently decided at some point in his life that complaining was a form of debt he refused to carry. But there was a particular quality to the cold quiet coming from Unit 3C that Daniel recognized. The kind of quiet that comes from a space without heat. The kind of silence that has weight and temperature. He knocked on Gerald's door on a Wednesday evening. Maisie was beside him, holding a box of pasta they'd been about to cook for dinner. Gerald opened the door in his overcoat and his wool hat. Inside the apartment, Daniel could see his own breath. "How long?" Daniel asked. Gerald said, "Oh, it comes and goes." It had not come in 11 days. Daniel stood in the doorway and did a fast mental inventory of what he knew about building heating systems, which was more than most people, because knowing how structures worked was simply how his mind operated, whether the structure was a legal brief or a baseboard heating circuit or a trim joint on a crown molding. He knew the part that was failing. He knew where to source it and what it would cost. The part was $240. His checking account that morning had held $263. Maisie pressed against his side in the hallway, the pasta box under her arm, looking at Gerald with the focused, solemn attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. Then she looked up at Gerald's face specifically. The hat, the coat, the particular way he was standing, and something resolved behind her eyes. "Mr. Gerald," she said, "your apartment smells like outside." Gerald laughed. A real laugh, sudden and unguarded. Daniel hadn't heard him laugh in weeks. Daniel ordered the part online that night after Maisie was asleep. $240. Standard shipping. 3 days. He installed it himself on Saturday morning while Maisie sat at Gerald's kitchen table doing her weekend reading homework, feet not quite reaching the floor, narrating horse facts to Gerald, who listened with complete apparent interest and asked follow-up questions. Gerald made them both instant hot chocolate from the second packet he'd been saving. He made Maisie's with extra powder because she was a guest, he said, and guests got the good ratio. Daniel didn't tell Gerald what the pot cost. Gerald didn't ask, and Daniel understood that the not asking was its own kind of dignity, and he respected it completely. What Daniel had not fully calculated, or had calculated and set aside, which was not the same thing as not knowing, was the collision of obligations now pressing in from every side. Car registration. Due in 12 days. $60. Remaining balance in checking. $23. He called his job site manager on Monday morning from the parking lot before heading in. "I need an advance on Thursday's hours." The manager was quiet for a moment. "You know I can't authorize that." "I know. You doing okay?" "I'm working on it." He hung up and sat in the car for 90 seconds, looking at the middle distance. Then he went to work. He spent Monday and Tuesday mentally turning the problem over, the way he turned a piece of trim stock over in his hands before cutting, looking at the grain, looking for the flaw, finding the angle. He ran numbers. He considered options. He discarded the ones that required asking for things he didn't ask for. On Wednesday evening, after Maisie was bathed and in pajamas and moving through her bedtime routine with the self-directed efficiency she developed sometime around age 6, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and opened his contacts. He scrolled to RF. He sat with his thumb over the name for a moment. Then he pressed call. The phone rang twice. The voice that answered was unhurried and exact, the voice of a man who had spent decades choosing words the way other men chose tools, for fit and function and nothing wasted. "I wondered when you'd call," Colonel Raymond Ferris said. "I'm not calling about that," Daniel said immediately. "I know," Ferris said. "You need something practical. $60 by Wednesday." A silence. Not awkward. The silence of a man running a quiet calculation and arriving at a number he'd already known. "Done," Ferris said. "But Daniel, there's something else. Something you need to hear." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. Slightly. Barely. There's a situation developing at Maisie's school. Ferris explained it carefully, without embellishment, without editorializing. The same way he'd always briefed, the same quality of attention to structure that Daniel had respected about him for 15 years. A school board restructuring was underway at the district level. A new administrative committee had been tasked with reviewing enrollment data and program funding across 12 elementary schools. Clearwater Elementary, Maisie's school, had been flagged for what the committee called a demographic boundary review. In plain language, they were redrawing the district lines. And if the lines were redrawn according to the current proposal on the committee's working document, a document that had not yet been made formally public but had been circulating in administrative channels, the Birchwood Avenue address would fall outside the new enrollment boundary. Maisie would be reassigned. Different school. Different district, bus route. The Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday pickup arrangement Daniel had built his entire work schedule around would collapse. When did this start? Daniel said. The public meeting is Thursday. That was 4 days away. He put his free hand flat on the kitchen table. Breathed slowly once. The registration. The $23. Now this. He looked at the kitchen wall, at the edge of Maisie's latest drawing, taped to the refrigerator, a horse mid-gallop, mane flying, hooves lifted. 4 days. Maisie appeared in the hallway doorway in her pajamas, her stuffed horse, a worn, floppy thing named Captain, tucked under one arm, hair still damp from the bath. "Dad," she said. "Is the pasta almost?" 2 minutes, he said. Voice level. Completely level. She studied him for 1 second with those focused eyes. Then she disappeared back down the hall. He stayed on the phone with Ferris for 9 more minutes, contributing mostly silence and the occasional 2-word clarification while Ferris laid out what he knew. When the call ended, Daniel stood at the kitchen counter and looked at nothing for a moment. Then he made the pasta. He used the good sauce, not the jar sauce, the kind from the can that needed a little olive oil and a pinch of red pepper and an extra 4 minutes. He let Maisie eat in front of the television because it was late and she was tired and he needed her calm and unhurried while he thought. He was still thinking when she fell asleep on the couch at 8:40. Captain the horse pressed to her cheek. He carried her to bed. He stood in her doorway afterward in the dark, looking at the horse drawings on the wall. All those layered horses, caught mid-motion, all of them going somewhere. Then he went to think some more. The second blow came on Tuesday. He found the notice slipped under the apartment door when he came home from the job site, still in his work boots, sawdust on his jacket, a long day behind him. A single sheet of paper, building manager letterhead, dated that morning. He picked it up and read it standing in the entryway. The building was converting all month-to-month lease arrangements to fixed-term contracts, effective in 30 days. New base rate. Updated utility provisions. The language was careful and dense and bureaucratic, and it took reading twice to locate the number inside it. $240 more per month. The exact number. The same exact number he'd spent on Gerald's heating part. He stood in the entryway and read the notice a 3rd time. Not because it had changed. Just because he needed to be certain he had understood it correctly. He folded it. Put it in the chest pocket of his flannel shirt, over his sternum. Then he drove to pick up Maisie. She climbed into the back seat, the taxi seat, she called it, and buckled herself in and immediately began a detailed analysis of a chapter from the horse training book her class was reading. She had concerns about the behavioral accuracy. Horses, she explained with some firmness, did not respond to pressure that way. She had read 3 other books. The evidence did not support the author's claims. Daniel drove. He listened. The exhaust rattled at every red light. The registration notice sat in the glove box. The lease notice sat against his chest. And Thursday was coming like weather. Thursday arrived grey and sunless, the sky a single flat color, cold in the particular way of late October when the warmth is fully gone and the cold hasn't yet decided to commit to being dramatic about it. Daniel dropped Maisie at Gerald's apartment. She had declared this arrangement ideal and brought her homework and captained the horse, and drove to the district administrative building on Calloway Street. He was 12 minutes early. The building was standard municipal. Wide carpeted lobby, fluorescent corridors, the particular institutional smell of carpet adhesive and recycled air. The meeting room was on the second floor, a wide space set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long polished table where 5 board members would sit. Daniel checked in at the door. The woman at the sign-in table, young, efficient, name tag slightly crooked, ran her finger down the sheet to his name. She paused, looked up at him, then back at the name. Then she handed him a paper agenda without a word. He took a seat in the 3rd row, center left. He folded the agenda once and placed it on his knee and did not look at it again. He had already read the agenda. He had found it in the district's online document portal on Sunday night and spent 2 hours cross-referencing the boundary proposal with the county parcel maps and 3 years of enrollment data the district had filed with the state. He knew the proposal. He knew its weaknesses. He knew the precedents. 20-some residents filled the room in the next 15 minutes. Mostly parents. A few community members. 2 brought children, restless kids who wanted to be anywhere else, who scrolled phones and shifted in chairs. Daniel registered each person without appearing to look at them. A habit. An old one. Board Chair Patricia Holt took a seat at the center of the long table at 7:02 p.m. Grey blazer. Efficient posture. The practiced ease of someone who runs meetings the way other people breathe, without thinking about it. She welcomed the room, outlined the agenda, and moved into the presentation with the quiet authority of someone who expects the evening to go according to plan. She had reviewed the proposal. She found it sound. The committee had done thorough work. There would be time for public comment. She anticipated it would be largely procedural. The first parent spoke about bus schedules. The second raised class size concerns. A third questioned the timeline. Daniel was 4th. He stood up. Patricia Holt glanced at her sheet. Found his name. Read it. Something crossed her face. Quick, almost imperceptible. Like a wrong note in an otherwise familiar piece of music. She looked up at him. The worn flannel. The paint on the jeans. The complete, unperformed stillness of him. Mr. Reeves, she said, with the precise neutrality of someone who has trained themselves to treat all members of the public identically. You have 3 minutes. I won't need that long, Daniel said. He was wrong about that. But not for the reason anyone expected. He spoke for 94 seconds. He presented the geographic data first, the specific block-by-block coordinates of the proposed boundary shift, the exact number of households on the Birchwood side of the new line, the enrollment impact expressed as a percentage of Clearwater's current capacity. He cited the demographic distribution differential between the proposed receiving school and Clearwater. He named 3 neighboring districts, by county and year, where equivalent boundary restructurings had been successfully challenged and reversed through administrative review, and he cited the specific regulatory standard under which those reversals had been granted. He spoke without notes. His voice was the same voice he used to tell Maisie that the pasta was ready. Measured. Unhurried. Completely without performance. When he finished, he sat down. The room held a particular quality of silence. Not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of a group of people recalibrating. 2 parents in the row behind him exchanged a glance. A woman near the window had stopped writing in her notepad mid-sentence. Patricia Holt looked at him for a moment longer than procedure required. Mr. Reeves, she said carefully, you appear to be very familiar with district administrative process. I've done some reading, he said. Board member Alan Chu, seated 2 chairs to Patricia's left, had opened his laptop at some point during Daniel's remarks and was typing. His expression had been shifting by degrees, the way ice shifts on water gradually, until the structure is different than it was. He leaned slightly toward Patricia and said something close to her ear, shielding his mouth with one hand. Patricia looked at him. Then at Daniel. Would you excuse us for one moment? The room stirred. A parent behind Daniel leaned to the person beside her. Two board members looked at each other across the table. Daniel sat in his chair with his hands resting on his knees and said nothing and changed nothing about his face. The board members conferred in lowered voices for just over a minute. Alan Chu's laptop screen faced away from the audience, but his face was fully visible, and his face was doing something specific. His mouth had opened slightly. He closed it with deliberate control. He typed something else. Read it. His right hand, resting on the table beside the laptop, had gone very still. He leaned toward Patricia again. She listened. And as she listened, something changed in her posture. Not dramatically, nothing theatrical, just a slight and total shift in her orientation toward Daniel. The way a compass needle corrects. She looked at him across the room. Mr. Reeves, she said, and her voice had a different texture now, careful in the way of someone choosing their footing on uncertain ground. We've become aware that you may have substantial relevant background in this area. Daniel said nothing. He was thinking about Maisie, about Gerald's warm apartment, about $23 in a checking account and a rusted Civic in the parking lot and a gold star on the dashboard and a little girl who thought the taxi seat was the best seat. Is it accurate, Patricia continued, slowly, the way you read something aloud when you're still processing what you're reading, that you served as a federal education policy consultant during the 2011 National District Restructuring Initiative? And that prior to that work, you spent 11 years as a judge advocate general officer? And that you held a senior legal review position at the Office of General Counsel at the United States Department of Education? The room did not explode. It collapsed inward. The parent near the window stopped breathing for a moment. A man in the second row turned around to look at Daniel directly, openly, without apology. The young woman who had handed Daniel his agenda at the sign-in table had appeared in the doorway of the meeting room and was standing there with her lanyard in both hands and her eyes very wide. Alan Chu placed both palms flat on the table. Both palms. Flat. He was looking at Daniel the way you look at something you've seen every day without understanding what you were looking at. The younger board member, third from the left, early 30s, the one who'd asked the sharpest questions during the presentation, was looking at Daniel with an expression that had moved entirely past surprise and arrived somewhere more complicated. Reassessment. The active, visible kind. Daniel did not stand up again. He did not confirm or deny anything with drama. He did not explain himself or offer credentials or reach into his jacket for a document. He said, I drove here tonight because my daughter goes to Clearwater. That's the only reason I'm in this room. The simplicity of it landed like something heavy dropped in still water. Patricia Holt looked at the boundary proposal document in front of her. She looked at it for a full 4 seconds. Then she reached across the table and turned it face down. It was a small motion. Paperwork reversed on a table. But every person in the room understood exactly what it meant. A man in the second row began to applaud, slowly, without theatrics, the kind of clapping that is not enthusiasm but recognition. 2 others joined him. Then a fourth. Daniel stood, folded his jacket over his arm, and walked toward the exit without hurrying. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around. The Birchwood families would appreciate written confirmation of the boundary decision within 10 business days, he said, to the room at large, to no one specifically, to everyone. Then he pushed through the door and walked into the corridor. A woman caught up to him at the elevator. Diane, a mother from Maisie's class, someone he'd nodded to in the pickup line for 2 years without exchanging more than 12 words. She was moving quickly, slightly breathless. She looked at him, the flannel shirt, the paint-stained jeans, the car keys in his fist, and then she seemed to not know where to start. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she said finally. "Any of it." He thought about Maisie's gold star on the dashboard. About Gerald in his coat in a cold apartment. About the folded lease notice against his chest. About a note on a kitchen counter read standing up 4 years ago. About all the ways you learn over time that what you are is not the same as what you've done, and that only one of those things needs an audience. "Tell them what?" he said. Completely genuine. No irony. Diane stood in the corridor with her coat still buttoned and her program still folded in her hand, and she watched him walk to the elevator, descend, cross the lobby, and push through the glass doors into the cold October night. She watched him walk to the far end of the parking lot. She watched him get into the rusted $800 Honda. She heard it start, that specific rattling exhaust note she now realized she would never hear the same way again. She watched the headlights come on. She watched it back out of the space and signal and merge smoothly into the evening traffic on Callaway Street and disappear. She stood there for another moment. Then she went back into the meeting room, where the board members were still sitting at the table, still quiet, the proposal still face down. Gerald was asleep on the couch when Daniel got home, a blanket pulled up to his chest, the card game spread across the coffee table mid-hand. Maisie was curled against his side, fully asleep, shoes still on, Captain the horse pressed flat between her chest and Gerald's arm, her mouth slightly open. The apartment was warm. The heater was running. The one that cost $240 to fix. Daniel stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at his daughter for a long time. At the shoes still on her feet. At Captain. At the way she tilted into Gerald's side, the way a small thing tilts toward warmth without thinking about it. At her face, which was the most unguarded thing he had ever seen in his life, every single time. He went to the kitchen. He made a cup of coffee. He sat at the table in the quiet apartment, and he didn't do anything else for a while. He just sat there in the warm kitchen, in the particular silence of a man who has done what needed doing and is now resting inside the fact of it. 3 months later, the Birchwood boundary remained unchanged. The written confirmation arrived from the district office on the 9th business day. One day inside the window Daniel had specified. Signed by Patricia Holt. Formal, official, unambiguous. 12 families on the Birchwood side of the original proposal received copies. Several of them didn't fully understand what had almost happened, or why it hadn't. They taped the letter to their refrigerators anyway, the way you keep something you can't quite explain but know enough to preserve. The district also initiated a building habitability review across all residential addresses in the Clearwater enrollment zone, prompted, according to the public record, by an anonymous written complaint filed the week after the Thursday meeting. Gerald's apartment received a full heating system replacement before December. The building manager oversaw it personally and did not make eye contact with Daniel in the hallway for approximately 3 weeks afterward. The lease rate increase was rescinded without explanation 31 days after it was posted. The car registration was paid on time. $60. It always would be. And every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 3:15 p.m., a rusted $800 Honda Civic pulls into the third row of the Clearwater Elementary parking lot. A man in a worn flannel shirt cuts the engine and waits behind the wheel. 5 minutes early. Same spot. He doesn't join the social hour. He doesn't explain himself to anyone. He puts the car in park and he waits. And on the dashboard, slightly off-center between the defroster vents, a gold star sticker catches the afternoon light. When the bell rings, a girl in a navy blue jacket comes running. She is always running. Arms already out. And the man who was once a federal policy consultant and a JAG officer and someone whose name could make a room go quiet gets out of that rusted car in one motion. And he catches her, and she laughs, and they get back in together, and the exhaust rattles, and they pull out of the lot. That is the whole of it. That is the entire story. Quiet men carry the loudest histories. The ones who gave the most rarely explain themselves, not because they have something to hide, but because the giving was never about being seen. They just show up. In rust and flannel at 3:15, in the same spot, because someone is counting on them to be there. Because that is what the work actually looks like, most days. Not medals. Not meetings. Just the car in the right spot at the right time, and the door opening, and the arms reaching. Here is the question worth sitting with tonight, the one that doesn't have a clean answer. If Daniel had walked into that meeting room in a suit, with a briefcase, in a car that didn't rattle, would the school board have taken him seriously from the first sentence? And if the answer is yes, what does that say about what we actually value, and whose voice we decide to hear before we've decided who they are? If this story moved you, like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Solo Dad Stories for more stories about strength, sacrifice, and second chances.